Welcome to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. Every week, I'll sit down with a professional comedian to unpack how they prepare for a gig, what they're thinking about while they're on stage, and how they reflect once it's over. Because great performances don't just happen, they're built. Dominic Frisby is a comedian and author on financial topics. I've been keen to get him on here because he's a top bloke, he's very funny, and he communicates away from comedy at conferences and the like, which means that he intrinsically knows about the transferable skills that we discuss in this podcast. Dom and me cover why the audience is always the best editor, the links between investment and comedy, how people don't want or like perfection, plus Dom's memories of a comedy legend. Enjoy. Dominic, when you're building material, either connected with finance or connected with comedy, what's your process to think about if it's going to be accessible to your audience?
I don't really have a process. I should say one of the great disciplines of stand-up comedy is that if the audience doesn't understand what you're saying, they don't laugh and you die.
Yes.
So that very quickly forces the discipline of clarity onto the comedian.
Right.
You know, the audience has to understand what you're talking about and what you're saying. So, for example, if you're talking about a specific subject that requires a specific knowledge, then you probably don't want to tackle that subject to a mainstream crowd. And it's probably why you get so many comedians talking about, relationships and the difference between men and women, because that's just a subject that everyone understands, the world over. But if, say, I've got a really good routine about model train sets, but nobody understands model train sets, but I do that routine at my local model train set club one time, then I'll probably have the gig of my life, because it's the first time that a comedian's ever done a routine about model train sets. And I'm talking about this really specific niche interest.
Yeah.
So you do find a lot of comedians do that. They go, as their career progresses, they go into areas where they have a specialized interest and find a certain amount of success. What springs to mind is James Dowdeswell talking about beer.
Right.
And but there are plenty of other comedians who've done similar things. But in terms of writing material, I should say, Sam, I don't actually regard myself as that good as stand-up comedian. I've got quite a low opinion of my stand-up comedy. I always felt I was a very good compere, and I used to do characters, 25 years ago, and I was quite good at them, and sort of larger than life, left field speciality acts. But just a bloke standing there with a mic telling jokes, I never really thought I was much good at that. I'm okay telling stories, but so and then obviously I do think I'm good at writing comic songs and doing comic songs and that kind of thing, which is a similar skill, but not exactly the same thing. So, but when I'm writing material, I find it hard to just write material. I don't find it as hard to write songs. I can sit down and go, I've got to write a song, but normally I have to have the idea first. And I tend to get most of my ideas when I'm walking. And once I've got the idea, I can go and write a song or whatever, but I can't always go and write a routine. I just find that much harder. And a lot of the time when I do have some stand-up routines that I'm quite proud of, but, I've had help. I've spoken to other comics and gone, what do you think I should do here? What do you think I should do there? And they've suggested lines, and, I've relentlessly worked them and got them better. But so, yeah, I hope that helps answer your question. And when it comes to my comic songs, a lot of the time they're articulating a political or an economic point in a funny way, you know.
Yeah, right. I know exactly what you mean about audiences. I play for a local darts team in Lingfield, and I made a joke on the WhatsApp group the other day that everyone was in stitches, and immediately their cogs started going like, is there anything I could do with this? But you're right. It's like your example of the train set. Too niche. Too niche.
Yeah. But it might work, you know, if it was like an evening with Sam Carrington and everyone knew that Sam Carrington likes darts and therefore you attract a, you know, a darts crowd, then you could do it. But it's if you're just doing a regular comedy club for, you know, Tom Tom Blogs, Joe Blogs, then it's slightly different.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think, by the way, that's one of the reasons why mixed bill comedy is struggling a bit at the moment. I don't
Uh-huh.
think it'll be permanent. I think it'll find its feet again because it's, you know, it's been through down times, but it tends to be a, you know, people find an act they like on the internet and they go and see that guy, and so you know, touring shows are doing quite well. But mixed bill comedies are struggling because, for example, if I'm doing a mixed bill show, if I'm doing my solo show, people will come and see me because they want, you know, the Brexit song or, you know, comic songs from a libertarian point of view. Whereas if I start doing, for example, the Brexit song in a regular comedy night, well, I'm going to lose half the room straight away. So it's so I don't
Yeah.
do that song. So
Yeah.
you get Dominic Frisby with some of the dials turned down, and then so Dominic Frisby with some of the dials turned down is not as good as Dominic Frisby, you know, on full
Yes.
throttle. And I think that applies to everyone. And so, you know, a left wing guy might, you know, who's got really strong Marxist views or something, might air them at his own show where people know he's a Marxist, and you know there's a load of Marxists in the crowd and they're interested in Marxist comedy. But if he goes and does them, you know, just in a regular comedy night, well, three-quarters of the audience aren't going to be sympathetic to Marxist ideas, you know, so
Yeah,
it
yeah.
tones them down.
I do know what you mean. But even with your turned down version, I bumped into a pal of mine, Dave, at the cricket club, comes along to the Smirk nights that we run, and he made a point of describing one of your songs to him that stuck with him many months later. So,
Oh well, that's good.
so
That's good.
you were even the toned down stuff does indeed have a market. Dom, tell me, you must have thought a little bit about this. What are the common psychological traits between investors and comedians?
There are actually some. It's not a question I'd ever really thought of, but
All right.
um, when you're on your own,
Yep.
and I think as a comic, you know, you're on your own, ploughing your own little furrow, and but at the same time, and there's no like, there's no. My dad used to say this about golf. You know, you can have a short, fat bloke playing golf or a tall, thin bloke, and you know, it doesn't matter how good your swing is or how good your technique is or whatever, as long as you get the ball in the hole in 3 shots or 4 shots or whatever. And, you know, that's all that matters. And
Yep.
so you'll get guys who maybe don't swing the club as elegantly as Ernie Els or someone who ever had a really good swing.
Yep. He
And
did.
yet they get in fewer shots because of whatever. And comedy's a bit like that. There's no right way or wrong way. There are certain guidelines, if you like. You know, one guideline, for example, might be that you don't do stolen material, but then there are plenty of comedians who've done very well doing stolen material. So it's only a guideline.
Yeah.
You know, they've made themselves unpopular, but if they've got on the telly or whatever, then other people want to know them whether they've done stolen material or not.
Hmm.
So there's no, and there's no, there are no rules as long as the audience laughs and likes you. That's it really.
Yeah.
But you can't, you know, you've got to show up on time reasonably, otherwise you piss people off. And in
Yeah.
fact, there are comedians who don't show up on time. But you've got to do your time, uh, and you've got to make people laugh. And investments, and so you're playing your own thing, but at the same time, there's a sort of camaraderie between comedians because we're all on the same journey.
Yep.
And um, it's quite a sort of self-interested existence because you want the laughs and you want the money and you want the fame and all of that. But at the same time, there's incredible camaraderie between you and the other acts, particularly if you're, when you're starting out and you're driving to Timbuktu for Jeff Whiting and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
This camaraderie builds, and then there's there's healthy competition as well between acts. But the acts will go, I don't want to follow that guy, so he better be the headliner. So they're partly they want to be the headliner because they want to be the most successful guy, but they also don't want to die, and so they'd rather have a good gig and go on in the middle and not have to follow the headliner. So the hierarchy kind of establishes itself by natural forces quite well. But where a lot of headliners are quite rightly resentful is if, say, they don't get on the telly, and there's some actors come through very quickly and got on the telly, and they're not that good an act, and then they're on the bill, and the guy from the telly, the person on the telly, is like, no, I don't want to close because such and such is closing, and such is going, well, why should I close? It's much harder closing. You're the TV name. You got the telly gig. You close. So that happens. But TV, the same sort of natural market forces that apply on the live circuit. By the way, live comedy is the only art form pretty much that survives on its own 2 feet, doesn't need subsidy, government intervention. And then as soon as you go into television, you get all sorts of external market intervention, and then the whole thing's just shit again. But the live circuit functions on natural market forces, and that's why it's quite good. And similarly, investment, sometimes you look at an investment and you go, this is a slam dunk. I know this company, I know this bloke, I know this situation. I just know this is going to work, and then it doesn't. And comedy can be a bit like that. You just think this gig going to be like this, and then you go and die on your ass. And you can have some big wins in investing that perhaps you don't deserve, but it's your big losses, the deaths, that you learn the most from. And in fact, it's the deaths. Like when I see a comic have an easy gig and he storms it, and I'm like, great, that was easy. When I see a good comic have a really difficult gig and then storm it,
right,
then I'm impressed.
Like,
and in fact, even if he dies, I'm like, what you did there was better than what you did before, because the other one was just easy because you said your jokes and they laughed. What you did there to turn it round and I mean, how many comics have you seen snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? So there's parallels like that. And then there's certain rules with investing, no insider trading and whatever. I mean, if you're just a lowly investor, that doesn't really apply, because it's very rare you get inside information. And you can only evaluate what you see, and you have to manage yourself and manage your emotions. And sometimes there are reasons why the investment doesn't go well that really aren't your fault. Similarly with comedy, sometimes the room is unplayable, or the circumstances just weren't right, or the moon it was a full moon and everyone was behaving weirdly and there was literally nothing you could do. So but it teaches you, there's all sorts of disciplines and that kind of thing too. So there are many parallels.
I would say so. What a very considered answer that was. What have comedians worked out about holding people's attention that finance professionals haven't?
We come back to that thing I said at the beginning about the discipline of clarity that the comedian has. If they don't understand what you're talking about, they get bored very quickly, and that sense of agitation filters through the room. The same discipline of clarity does not exist in the world of finance. So it very quickly descends into its own jargon and uses words that are actually quite alienating to people who don't understand what those words mean. That's why you get people all the time, I don't understand finance. Well, you do. You understand money. You go to the shops. You know what you like to buy. You know what you don't like to buy. Everyone has an understanding of it. But if I use words like the bond yield, the yield on the gilt is 7.5%. Most people's eyes glaze over. So
Yes.
there is a jargon that alienates people, and but the former president of the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the America's central bank, was a guy called Alan Greenspan, and when he used to talk, everyone would struggle to understand what the hell he was talking about. And he'd talk about these market forces and this and that, and this, for that reason we have to leave interest rates at this, that, and everyone just couldn't understand what he was talking about. And he actually, it was deliberate. He would call it purposeful obfuscation. He was
Right.
deliberately talking about impossible things because he didn't want people to understand. Because by being clear, you're exposing yourself. There's a vulnerability to clarity, and you
Yeah.
don't necessarily want that if you're it's like politicians not answering the question, but on steroids. In the central bank, you don't actually want people understanding what you're talking about, why you're doing it a lot of the time. That's not something I agree with, by the way, but that's just how it is. And a lot of the time, if I write a financial column and I'll go, I really like this company and I think it could go up, but I don't want to get too excited, because if it goes down and I've said in print it'll go up, I look like a fool 6 months on. So you always find yourself hedging. You can't, if
Right.
you hedge in comedy, it's crap. You've got to go for it in comedy. You can't
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's the communication skills are quite different.
No, very much so. If you had a topic that was relatively intellectually dense, but you thought, oh, there's a really good point here, or there's something really funny here, it would just be a question of you of like going back over it, like making it as clear as possible, working out if the subject is accessible. Would that be the types of things that you would do? Because you've done some brilliant sets that I've seen about things like a handsome tax, for
Oh
example,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that how that would work out, and no one would mind getting the tax bill come in and stuff like that.
yeah. I need to revive that routine, but
You should.
um the I wrote a book about taxation.
Right.
And so, I understand the sort of principles of it quite well. And just backtrack a little bit. I wrote a song once called Crony Capitalism Will Not Be Tolerated, which was very kind of, it was meant to, um, it was kind of very reverential to a song called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised by Gil
Right.
Scott Heron, which was a sort of, I
Yeah.
suppose you'd call it beat poetry.
Hmm.
And one of the things that annoyed me is that people complain about capitalism. And I would go, that's not what you're complaining about, is not capitalism. It's crony capitalism. If you're complaining about house prices cost too much, well, that's a function of uh, not having building regulations and not and the money system and planning laws and all these kind of things. And if you're complaining about train fares being too high, well, that's a function of the fact that the government has given the license for the train line to one company and nobody else can build a train line on the same route. And if other people could build a train line on the same route, then there would be competition and that would force down prices. So all these things that people go, oh, it's capitalism. I'd be like, no, it isn't capitalism. It's crony capitalism. So
Hmm.
I spent, the first 30 seconds of the song explaining what crony capitalism was. And it was quite hard to explain, but I hopefully did it in I wouldn't call it funny, but reasonably amusing way. And
Hmm.
then did the song Crony Capitalism. So in songs, you can do it a lot of the time in the setup. You can explain something and then you do the punchlines. It's essentially a list song. Most comic songs are list songs. So yeah,
Right.
you do. But with the tax one, what that was is I wrote this book about tax, and I also had this real beef that every there's so many special interest groups in this country, but in the West generally, and everyone wants some kind of benefit or special favor for this thing. You know, I should get a special favor because I've got this disability, or I should get a special favor because, you know, I'm from an ethnic minority, or I should get a special favor because of this, that, and the other. And there's all these reasons why people want some kind of special, you know, positive discrimination of some kind, or a grant or whatever. And when in, you know, because they all came to be victims of discrimination. And I just think everyone is a victim of discrimination, everyone. And at the same time, everyone discriminates. And it was once upon a time, if you were a discriminating gentleman, that was considered a good thing. But everyone discriminates. And, you know, when I meet somebody for the first time, you can't help noticing what they look like, how they sound like, how they dress, all these things. You just do, and you make judgments because that's what human beings do.
Yep.
And there's no point trying to repress human nature. And I don't see why, just because I think one, you know, when you take my accent, for example, somebody was doing something on Twitter where they were listing all these words, and you had to have the correct pronunciation of each word, and that was a measure of your IQ. And I work a lot doing voiceovers, so I read the list out with the correct pronunciation of each word. And there was some American in Texas who just went, I can't listen to that accent. Every time I listen to that accent, it's just so grating. Now, that obviously the English, and I've had the same when I go to Ireland and you talk to and I've been in plays and things in Ireland, and, you know, there's certain Irish people who hate the English, and when they hear my accent, it gets right underneath their teeth. Similarly, there'll be other Americans who hear, you know, fairly classic English accent, and they'll love me for it.
Yep.
And similarly, you know, I might go for a job in the city or something, and if I've got an accent like this, it'll help me. But if I, you know, go for a job as I don't know, a builder or something, then my accent's going to work against. Well, I don't think accents matter in building, but you've got my point.
Yeah.
So the same thing can work to your advantage with one crowd and to your disadvantage with another crowd. So anyway, so this thing of certain groups getting special favors, what I'd read this study, the most discriminated group against group in all society is ugly people, the bottom 20%. And it doesn't matter if you are, it doesn't matter what age you are, what religion you are, what race you are. What matters is how good looking you are. And it's not so much that you've got to be really good looking. It's just that you can't be in that bottom 20-25%.
All right.
And if you are, you find they get overlooked for jobs. They get overlooked for when they do have a job, they get paid less. They're more likely to get the sack. And when they do get the sack, they're more likely to commit crime. When they do commit crimes, they get longer sentences from the judge. They get overlooked for loans, like all these things, all these various forms of discrimination. And so I wanted to make this point. And then actually, it was my girlfriend at the time, a comedian called Aideen McQueen. She wrote this routine about a hot tax. And she just wrote it. And I was like, I've been trying to think of a way around this for 5 years. Please sell me that routine, and I can incorporate all this other stuff into it. She was like, no, I really like doing it. And I literally like had to give her free rent for about a year for her to give me that routine. But it was only like, you know, maybe a minute that she wrote, but it was the angle. As soon as I saw what she wrote, I could see the angle for the whole routine. So that was the thing. It was just the step in. And I do think it's a really strong routine, and it makes a very good point. Although some people get really angry when I do it. But in any case,
do they?
Oh my God, I've had walkouts and God knows what.
From the ugly people, presumably.
Well, I changed it round because it sounded like I was making jokes about ugly people. So I turned it round and put the good looking people first and then put the ugly people second, because I didn't want to make jokes about ugly people, but it sounded like I was. Like there was a big thing about a week or two ago. Alistair Campbell's daughter was complaining that people who voted for Brexit were ugly or something, and she was saying ugly, 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 and doing all this, and it sort of went viral, and then everyone got really upset that she should be so lookist. And, you know, and it was there was a big storm, and, you know, people who got upset about it, you know, had a point. You know, you don't, but there's no kind of campaign group standing up for the ugly, and in the way that there is, you know, Black Lives Matter or whatever the campaign group is. So that was the that was the point of that routine, but it was years before I saw a way around it.
No, sure. It's a perfect example of the time it takes working on bits in front of a live audience before you have that kind of eureka moment. And then it
Yeah.
all just goes bop, 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 bop. You go, that's it. That's it. Happens.
Audiences are the best editor ever. And I don't care how good AI gets, it will never be as good an editor as an audience. But
Mm,
the only problems with using audiences as your editor is, um, when you're doing new material and new material, you're right at the line of acceptability with the new material. Um, Audiences are often, part of the process of writing the new material is to find out where the line is. So you're inevitably going to overstep it. And you need quite a forgiving audience that will forgive you for overstepping the line, because if they start getting angry, they don't understand that it's new material and you're exploring. They just hear something that's not acceptable.
well, and that's it. And the trouble is, different audiences have different lines as well, don't they? You're
Yes,
flirting with a line that is movable.
yes, and it changes over time as well.
Yeah, right.
I
It
think it even
does.
changes with the time of day, by the way.
Do you think?
Yeah,
What do you mean? If you've done,
I
say,
think
festival
people have
shows at
much.
certain, time slots or something?
Yeah, people's morals get looser the later at night it is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm just
And they
thinking.
definitely change between night and day.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The first time I did Edinburgh, it was 2 in the afternoon, and I realized the stuff that I could do on later shows was very different.
Yeah. You
Very
can't do
different.
anything blue at that time of day.
No, it's tough. It's yeah, yeah. I would tend to agree with that. Do you ever think about the relationship between sounding intelligent and relatable? Because you are, I would say, you know, when it's going well, both of those things.
Oh, that's very kind of you. James Dowswell used to say about me, I'm the one posh act who made no apology for being posh. He
Yeah,
didn't
right.
even reference it. He just went on and did it. And I was quite proud of that. I mean, most kind of well-spoken acts would talk about the fact that they were well-spoken in some way. Will Smith or Miles Jupp or even Jimmy Carr, those kind of people. Um, but so
Because
yeah, I
because
like that.
going back to what you said about judgments, you walk on and say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Everybody already knows that anyway, don't they? It isn't like they're trying to piece together, who's
Yeah,
this guy, who's this guy. The judgments that we make as humans, 24/7 when we're alive would say, okay, yeah, this guy's well educated, he's well spoken, blah, 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 blah,
yeah.
blah. So there's no there's no real need to, I don't think.
No, and I mean, a lot of people start out making jokes about themselves or their defining characteristics. So, for example, a Geordie might make jokes about being a Geordie, or
Yeah.
somebody with a disability might make jokes about their disability or whatever. And I've never really known what my defining characteristic is, and whether it's
Yeah,
worth. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
I was.
Yeah.
I'm not like, I'm not enough of anything to be anything.
Yeah.
So my defining characteristic is that I'm average. And I've never really worked out. That's something I've wanted to make jokes about for 20 years, but I've never really worked out how to.
I know exactly what you mean. I now, through life circumstances, tend to host more shows than I do sets. But when I was hacking around the country or doing festivals, that crossed my mind as well, that there isn't a kind of obvious peg to hang your hat on if
Yeah,
you are a, you know, white middle class bloke, because there's lots of them
yeah,
in comedy. So you've got to think about more universal things than that.
yeah.
So I
Peter
don't
Graham
know.
used to say, having a strong accent gave you a 15% advantage.
Yeah, right. That's interesting, isn't it? There's a part of me thinks Irish acts have an advantage. It's almost like everything that comes out of their mouth sounds like it's the start of that it's a setup, whether it is or not,
Yeah.
almost.
Well, again, but again, when they go to Ireland, there's nothing.
No,
The
no,
Irish
you're
aren't
right.
charmed by an Irish accent in the same way that the English are, you know.
No, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. How quickly, in your experience, do you think audiences can pick up on authenticity?
Uh, well, I'd like to say very quickly, and some of the time, you know, I think they can pick up very quickly, but I've seen other acts who are just total bullshit artists and they've hoodwinked audiences, and it annoys me. So
Right.
I don't have a definite answer to that question, but
No, no.
yeah,
Yeah, I know that.
I've seen people get found out, and I've seen people uh
Get
not
away
get
with it.
found out who should
Yeah.
have been found out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to work in BBC Radio, and what did we used to call them? Something like red light divas or something like that. It's when the on air bit comes on and they're like, oh, it's so lovely to be here. And I'll be in the outer studio looking at them going, you weren't like that for any of the last half an hour. But yeah, hopefully
Yeah,
those people do end up getting their comeuppance.
yeah. Funnily enough, I used to work in BBC Radio once upon a time as well, for the World Service. But yeah, you know that. And the other thing you see sometimes, you see on, like I did, I once did I wrote a book and I got asked on the Today program, and I was talking with somebody on the Today program, and oh no, it wasn't. It was Adam Bolton and oh, some woman from the Guardian. I've forgotten her name, and like they were all so nice backstage, and they just put me into. I didn't realize they were all. I voted Brexit, and they were both Remainers, and they
Right.
they were all so nice. And then as soon as the thing started rolling, they just turned into total Charlie Uniform November tangos. But as soon as the program stopped, they were nice again. I was like, what? I just felt so naive. I was totally found out. Then I got found out. Then I'll tell you.
Did you come out of your corner with your gloves up a bit more in the future ones of those?
I'm not going. I would never go on a program that he presented again.
Oh, okay. Right. 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 You.
That's my defense, is to not engage.
Well, absolutely. No, that is probably not a bad way to be.
Well, I'm not like there's some. I'm not that. There's some comics and just other. Constantine Kissin, who I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
He's not really a comic anymore. He's more just a sort of what do you call him? A philosopher or a thought leader or a commentator, I suppose is the word. But he's just able to articulate what he's thinking. He's so clear in his worldview, and then he's able to articulate what he's thinking in any given moment. He's just the most formidable opponent if you get into an argument. And I just
Yeah.
think poor people who get into arguments with him on things like Question Time, because he absolutely rinses them. And I'm just like, I couldn't do that. I just don't have it. I'm partly because I'm too scared, but partly I just don't have the strength of mind or the recall, or I don't even know what it is. But he's brilliant
Yeah.
at it. I just snipe from the sidelines rather than.
Yeah. 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 Tell me, Tom, you mentioned failure earlier on. Could you think of any failures, either on stage or professionally, that have taught you the most in life?
Well, I mean, I've had some amazing deaths.
Go on, tell us about one or
I
two of
mean,
them.
well, I've stunk rooms out. Like I just don't believe anyone has stunk rooms out like I have. I'm sure every comedian thinks that, but I mean, I've just had some extraordinary deaths, and
What
I
would that be,
suppose.
through the political message you
No,
were
no, no,
putting
no.
across?
When I was younger, I just don't think my act just wasn't good enough, basically. But the and I wasn't experienced enough to deal with it. So the first act I ever wrote was an act called The Upper Class Rapper, and it was a comedy rap in this posh persona to music. And if you put it, it was a novelty act, and if you put it in the middle of the show, it just used to absolutely rock. And when I was like, my first ever gig was up the creek doing an open spot. My second gig was a paid 10 at Up the Creek. My third gig was a paid 10 at Up the Creek. Then I did a couple of gigs somewhere else. And my sixth gig was a paid 20 at Up the Creek.
Jesus.
It just went so quickly. And it was on the first paid 20 was on the day that Lady Diana died.
Oh dear.
and, uh, and, but I discovered this about the act. You just couldn't put it on first. It just did not work going on first. You had to stick it on in the middle. It wasn't good enough. I could close shows, but it wasn't really a closing act. But you had to have a compare and a bloke talking about stuff, and then an interval, and then you could have me. You just couldn't put it on first because it was just too left field, and it wasn't stand up. It was a kind of musical act, and so I built up this fear of going on first. And my first death going on first was on that day, the day of Lady Diana's death. And
I don't know why I'm laughing at that,
well,
but
it was
it is
brutal. I mean, I
relatively
just you
funny.
can imagine the atmosphere in the room. And Malcolm was just like insulting her anyway. It was it was the day she died on the Saturday night, on the
Yeah.
Saturday night, Sunday morning, and the gig was on in the Sunday evening.
Oh, so everyone just had time
It
to
was the day of her death. So
absorb the first
you know,
wave of
and it
grief.
and I mean, everyone was I used to do it in this pinstripe suit, and everyone was going, "You just come from a funeral," and it was and I just because I'd just done this in act exactly the same every night, and it was always in rhyme. You know, not a syllable changed, and so I just could only do the act. It was like an actor doing an act rather than which is what I was. It wasn't a comic. So I didn't have the, there was nothing I could do. So I just had to carry on. And then the more I carried on, the more angry the audience would become. And then as I was sort of making my way, I went from open spots to paid sets pretty quickly. And then Off the Curb would always put me on first. And I would die because that's what happened to the act. Off the Curb still won't book me now. They haven't forgiven me. You know, they say people hold grudges in this business. They do. People never forget. And so I don't know what to. I just so as a result of that, I wrote all sorts of different acts, and I guess that's what comedy is. You try a joke, it doesn't work, you write another joke, and I wrote a million different acts, and then in the end, I just went, do you know what? I need to just go and compare, and then so I just sort of. And I think I read in Frank Skinner's book, he argued that the way to get better is to compare. And I just went and compared. And it was at Peter Graham at Up the Creek sort of gave me my first, not Up the Creek, at the King's Head gave me my
King's Head,
first regular
yeah.
slot comparing. And that was maybe 2003, something like that. And then I just really, really enjoyed it. And I found it really easy. And I had absolutely zero sympathy for acts who got nervous about going on first. That was my thing. But yeah, so, and I literally did that for about 10 or 15 years, and I got lazy, I think. And then, around about 2016, 2017, then I started getting into the songs and all of that. And that sort of took me somewhere else.
Yeah. No, brilliant.
I still regard myself as a really good compere.
I've
even
never
if
seen
nobody else does.
I've never seen you do that. Yeah, even if
But it's such a valuable, you have it, you're a good compere, but I just, I don't know how I do it. And I'm sure you don't know how you do it, but I just know, like I'll go on stage with a couple of jokes,
yeah,
and I might get round to doing them or I might not, depends
that's
what
right.
happens.
Yeah.
And but I just know that I can talk to the front row and make something, and something funny will happen. And if it doesn't happen, I'll just do one of the jokes. But most of the time it does happen. And then when I do one of the jokes, then I go back and talk to somebody else, and something might happen. And it's like people kind of go, people who don't know anything about comedy, they just go, "How do you do that? You just go on and be funny."
Yeah.
And you just learn how to do it from comparing. It's bizarre.
That, funnily enough, is exactly what the other side of Smirk Experience is. As you know, it's explaining to people quite often in finance-based industries whose, product knowledge is very, very high, but what they can't do so much of is be able to deliver it. I saw an interview with Warren Buffett, and the guy said, "What's the one thing young financiers should focus on?" And Buffett said straight away, "Learn how to communicate with people."
Oh, did he?
Because it's taken as given that amendments to tax laws and the implication that has on the economy, but it's what you do with that.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And you're right, it is a kind of je ne sais quoi type thing, but I do think there are I do think everyone can be as good as they can be. It isn't necessarily like, being able to hold court like Oscar Wilde in Kettner's in 1897 when he had the whole room falling off their chairs laughing. But like how I describe it to people, I used to work on the London Marathon when I was a kid. They'd split the track up into the boroughs in London, and the different boroughs would be responsible for putting up the crash barriers and the water stations, or where a band would be playing, or whatever it was. Have you ever watched the London Marathon?
I have, yeah, but not recently. But I know what happens. I've been
Yeah.
to see it, watch it live, and I've watched it on the telly, obviously.
Yeah,
Well.
right. Well, you might have seen this. So you obviously get the kind of nippy little African lads who basically sprint the whole thing.
Yeah.
But pretty soon after that, you've got marker runners. So if you're a club runner and you want to do, I don't know, a 3 hour marathon or a 3.5 hour or a 4 hour,
Yeah.
they've got people running along, and it says on a sign they've got on their backs 3 hours, and that means that runner is part of the marathon, and he or she is going to run exactly that time. So if you want to run sub 3 hours, you got to make sure that you beat him or her. And African lads bomb through who you could keep up with probably for about 200 meters on a good day. But what's incredible is quite soon after they're done, you get people who are like my height, like 6'3", 6'4", and they're not even skinny lads with it. They are, big old piece of kits. And they're doing a 3 hour marathon. And that, I think, is down to practice. I think that is the elite runners would be genetics. You're either born with that or you're not. But then there are people who just bang, 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 just put in the yards,
Yeah,
to the stage
even
where
then,
they get like that.
Even then, you're limited by what Mother Nature gave you.
Well, yes, we are. Yes, you are.
I mean, to run a sub 3 hour marathon is still hard if you're a unit.
No, very much so. Very much so. But they...
You know who you should talk to on this podcast? Get Paul Tonkinson in.
All right.
Do you know Paul?
I gigged with him years ago.
Well, he's just written a book. So people who've just written a book are very easy to get because they're trying to promote their book.
Brilliant.
But he talks about running and marathons and all of that. And, the crossover between stand-up and marathons and so on.
Does he?
Yeah.
Fascinating. I've just written his name down. Why are stories more persuasive than facts?
I don't know why, but they definitely are. People just need a story. We respond to stories, and it's not just stories. They work in stand-up, but they work in everything. You need why is this investment going to go up? You need to spin a narrative around around the situation. People just respond to a narrative. They always have. I don't know why. It's just something in the brain. The human beings, I guess it goes back to sitting around the fire and telling stories and myths and legends and all that. And one of the things I say in my gold book is today's current affairs become tomorrow's history, and they very quickly become myth and legend. If you think of the football players of your childhood, they're gods now. They're not football players anymore. They're gods. And
yeah, right.
Today's football players are probably much better, but not in your mind. They're not.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It is that. You obviously speak.
I would just I was
Go
going
on.
to say something when you were talking about the marathon. It was before, but talking about Paul. It was, oh yeah. One thing I would say, and it takes a certain amount of courage to do this, and it's taken me a long time to do it. I was always very good at reading, so I could go on stage and read a script if I'm doing a presentation or something, and just read a presentation out loud, read a speech, and make it sound like I was talking. But it's never as good as actually talking.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody that is learning to communicate, learning to stand on stage and everything, I would urge you as much as possible not to fully write the speech and to read it out.
Yeah.
And because once you do that, your brain gets locked into the audience can tell, even if you're good at reading, the audience can tell, and the energy level dips, and no matter how good the speech is, it's never as good as if you just do it off the cuff.
Definitely.
And when you just do the speech, and the material, it gives it an authenticity that doesn't come with when you read it. So maybe you can rely on bullet points. And this is why I think people like Donald Trump so much, why they like Nigel Farage so much. I know they've both got their enemies and their detractors, but they don't read the script. Like Trump gets given an auto cue and he starts reading it, and then he goes off on one. And then, and I know, because I used to work at GB News, Farage, even when he was working at GB News, wouldn't have an auto cue. He would just have a few bullet points and he would go off on one.
Yeah.
And obviously, they're both, Farage in particular is a brilliant speaker. You might not like him, but you've got to recognize as he's just a brilliant speaker. He's brilliant. That's why he's, been so successful in politics without ever becoming an MP until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He's a phenomenal speaker. And you very quickly learn, it's just a safety thing. I've got to read it because I might not forget to say this, or I might. You very quickly learn to just stand up and speak. It's bizarre. Daniel Kitson used to talk about it being the lights on the road. You're driving, and there's just the light when you're doing it. The lights on the road just become clear, and it just becomes clear where you should go. And Mike, to which Mike Gunn, I remember this conversation, said, "Well, they might be clear to you, but they're not to the rest of us." But they do. But they do. They just, the road where you got to go becomes clear, and so it's good to have some bullet points so you can look down and go, "What have I forgotten?" or whatever. But basically, just speak, and it's always better than reading, even if what you say, the words aren't as good. And so people read it afterwards and they go, "Well, that speech was better than this one." It doesn't matter. The speech in the moment at the time will be better if you don't read it. And like, there's something with the brain. If you have something written, you lose all your spontaneity. You can't then go into off the cuff stuff. You just can't. So yeah, if my number one thing would be, don't read the speech.
That is absolutely spot on. That's exactly some of the stuff that we take groups through. I say to groups, I bet all of you have been to weddings where the master of ceremonies says, "Ladies and gentlemen, pray silence for the best man." And the bloke stands up and goes, "I first met Steve in 2008 and good." And the whole room goes, "Oh, for Christ's sake, is he going to do this for the whole thing?" The speaker goes into kind of autopilot because they don't have to think about what's coming out of their mouths. All they have to do is read what's in front. But it just sounds dreadful. And
it's shit. And that maybe if you're an actor and you're used to bringing scripts off the page, even then it's not as good.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And again, going back, I agree entirely. I say to people, look, you lose more on the swings than you gain. You gain more on the swings than you lose on the roundabouts. Even if you fluff a word or you,
Doesn't
no
matter.
one,
If you
no
go,
one
I forgot what was
cares.
if you just go, where was I? Where was I? Blah, blah, blah. And then you remember what I do in Edinburgh every year. I don't do it anymore because the room where I used to do it isn't a venue anymore. But I used to do a lecture with funny bits, and it was an hour-long lecture, and I would write a new one every year. And often, like as a discipline, one year I wrote it the day before, just as a test to see if I could do it. And I'm like, how am I going to remember an hour's material the day before a show? And so I cheated, and I just had slides with pictures, and I always made sure on each slide to have a picture so that there was something interesting to look at, and there would just be a title, maybe a couple of bullet points, not too many, and I would just click through the slide, and there'd be a picture of Jason and the Argonauts. And it was like, oh yeah, so Jason and the Argonauts, and you tell the story of Jason and the Argonauts. Then you go to the next slide, and gold doesn't tarnish, or whatever the subject was, and I could talk about that. So use the slides to be your prompt board, or your
Yeah.
what you got
Yeah, right. Cues.
your cue card or something. Use that. Use the slides, and then you don't need to remember it. But even if you're doing but don't just read what's on the slides, because that's shit.
God,
just use
no.
the slides as bullet points, and do everything. Like, try and frame everything as a story. When I write books, if I just go, uh, for example, I could go. So the opening of my gold book, I could start going, gold doesn't tarnish, gold doesn't rust, it never loses its shine. You can't destroy gold. It doesn't corrode, and so you could list out all the qualities of gold. And instead of doing that, I went uh, in 5 years ago, in a field in Denmark, a metal detectorist with the unfortunate name of Ole Ginnerup Schitz unearthed a hoard of Viking coins that had been buried there 1500 years earlier. To his surprise, the gold coins were shining just as much as on the day they were buried. This is because gold doesn't tarnish, gold doesn't, and so on. And so as soon as you frame it around an incident, it's just better than just what's the thing they say, show don't tell.
Yeah.
I hate that expression, but it's true.
It is true. It is definitely true. I think for me, the kind of overarching, when you're talking about all of those things that we have for the last 5 minutes, for me, is you're trying to establish a connection with your audience. And once you just think of it in those terms, how can I connect with these people? Then I think in some ways, quite a lot of it kind of falls into place. Like, well, how would I talk to someone that I know? I wouldn't speak like this. I'd speak like we're talking now. As soon as you're thinking just about making a connection, once you've got that, the rest is almost kind of, people make up their minds that they like you, like the old Roman emperor, and you're off to the races, basically, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's right. They used to, when we were given instructions in radio, you were always taught, when you're talking, when you're doing radio, you're just talking to one person, and you're just in one person's ear. You're not talking to a room full of people, you're talking to one person. I suppose that's quite a good thought. But yeah, the audience will like you more if you don't read what you say. I'm sure of that. They will understand that it takes some bravery and that you will make mistakes, but they will like it for you. It will be more imperfect, but that is, people don't like perfection, they like imperfection.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Which in some ways was part of Boris's big sell, 100%. Wasn't it?
As soon as he started reading speeches, it was crap.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I once read a blog by Jeremy Vine where he was emceeing a corporate and Boris was the headline act. And Jeremy Vine does all his research. He's there, an hour before, meeting all the people. Boris is on at 9. It's like, 10 to 9, no Boris. 5 to 9, the door flies off its hinges. Boris comes in, sits down. What am I saying? Uh, don't have a pen. Thank you. Don't have a piece of paper. Oh, could I borrow a napkin? And Jeremy Vine's just looking at him with his eyes about to burst out of his head, but they've got to stick to the time. So he goes on, ladies and gentlemen, I think he might have been running Spectator or something. Boris Johnson. And he walks on and says, who are you? And he said the whole room was eaten out of his hand.
Yeah.
And then he said the two of them were booked to do another corporate, say 2 years later. Exactly the same thing happened. Jeremy Vine does all the research there early. 10 to 9, no Boris. 5 to 9, door flies off the. And he said it was just, you could have got one and put it on top of the other one and it would have perfectly matched. And that was. I always think what he needed was some grumpy sod like Alistair Campbell with his arms folded saying, put that bit of fucking cake down or whatever it was. But it all just seemed to be a little bit of a knees up, didn't it?
Yeah, well, I read that same article actually, and I
Ah.
was aware of that. And, I suppose at the end of the day, he's a comedian, Boris, isn't he? He can't help that's his first instinct is to make people laugh. And, I don't think he was a very good prime minister, but
No.
he was all right mayor, I suppose. He was a popular mayor. And, but, he was a clown and he enjoyed making people laugh. And, it's like, people watch comedy and then they go and see the same comedian 2 years later and they complain when he did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
That's it. That's it. That is exactly what happened. Dom, tell me, what's your favourite truth about people that you've learned through comedy?
One thing that annoys me is you compare a show and then the owner of the venue comes up to you in the interval or at the end of the show and goes, yeah, they're really nice, aren't they? And you're like, no, I made them nice. They don't understand that. I made them nice.
Yeah.
And that's the art of the compare. It's very easy. I know when I was younger, I don't know if it still applies now, but a lot of Aussie and Canadian acts used to get really riled by people heckling because it didn't happen in Australia and Canada. And they used to interpret every heckle as though it was with the most malicious motive. A lot of the time people just shout out because they're excited. They don't mean, and if they're trying to be funny, but they don't quite be funny. And so what they say can come out as quite nasty, but they don't actually mean to be nasty a lot of the time. So if you just take everything as well intended, then it just makes the room nice. And I think, so that is one truth. I think most people are nice most of the time. They don't want to see you die. They want to be interested in your presentation or laugh at your act or whatever it is, or be entertained by your speech. They don't, then they're not out for your demise, except for a couple of them. And so I think that's important to remember.
No, it's very important to remember. You mentioned Malcolm Hardy earlier on, Dom. I must just get you to go over your experiences of him, because for people that are listening to this and aren't into comedy, he was a bit like the footballers of my past and stuff like that. He's now a sort of legendary kind of status. He used to run up the creek for years, where, as you say, you started. Could you just tell us a little bit about your experiences with him?
Yeah, well, he was chaotic. He was a bit like Boris, I suppose. He was just chaos, followed him everywhere he went. And he just used to do. I think it's fair to say that the club he ran before Up the Creek, which is in Greenwich, was a club called the Tunnel Club, which I never actually went to. But it was before my time. But it was a sort of notoriously vicious club. And the audiences, if they liked you, they would carry you and make you give you the keys to the city. But if they hated you, they absolutely crucified you. And then he did his shows on this thing called the Wibbly Wobbly Boat, or the Wibbly Wobbly Comedy Club, or something like that, and which was on a barge. And in fact, he fell off the barge in the middle of the night when he was pissed, and he just
Right.
used to get really, really pissed. His opening line was, they say you only get to do up the creek twice in your career, once on the way up and once on the way down. It's good to be back. And it's a great opening line, but it's no way Malcolm came up with that line. It's like an old joke. It's
Yeah.
it's one of the great.
Yeah.
I love that opening line because it's so self-deprecatory.
Yep.
And he used to just do the same kind of 5 or 10 minutes when he was comparing, and he would compare it every week for years, and he never changed it. And then he'd sort of get bored in the middle, or he'd be pissed, and a lot of the time you couldn't even understand what he was saying, because he wasn't very clear. All right, you sort of talk like that, and what? And but there was an honest, and he was properly irreverential. Irreverent is the word I mean. So he wrote, his autobiography was called "I Stole Freddie Mercury's Birthday Cake," but he did actually steal Freddie Mercury's birthday cake.
Okay.
And he stole. There was a famous conservative politician, I forgot his name, and he stole his Rolls Royce. And he would just do, like, if there was an opportunity to do a prank, or he would just do it. Always taking his clothes off. He had enormous bollocks, and he would always take his clothes off on stage and get his bollocks out. And he would always do it. If an open spot died, the crowd would call Malcolm, and then Malcolm would come on stage, and then they'd go, "Get your bollocks out," and Malcolm would get his bollocks out, and it was just like mad. It was. I mean, he wouldn't last 5 minutes in today's age, but he was a product of a different time, and he was just. He lived like a comedian should live. And when he died, I think, he died, he was only in his mid-50s, so he's the same age as me now. And I think if I died now, I wouldn't be like Malcolm, but, the whole of Greenwich came to a standstill. That roundabout.
Yeah.
Not roundabout, but the sort of ring road that goes around
I know.
Greenwich.
Yeah,
It just came to a standstill because there was this huge procession for Malcolm's people. And I think if you die in your 80s or 90s, your network shrunk by then, but in your 50s, your network's kind of at its biggest. And so if you die then, he died young, but he died a legend. And Arthur Smith in his funeral compared the funeral, and Arthur Smith said, Malcolm Hardy, unlike his material, was a true original. And that kind of sums him up. He really was. And he wrote on his, for example, on his tax reform, he sent in his tax return, and he just wrote "deceased" and sent in his tax return and tried not to pay any tax that year. He would just do things like that. And he would be given the cash by the owner of the club, and he would come and pay you, but he'd always try and shortchange you by 20 quid. If you hadn't, particularly if you hadn't done well, he would shortchange you, and you'd have to like count the money out. And it was just part of him, like, he would try and fuck you over, but then he'd buy you a drink and be your best mate. And I remember, like, at one point I had an affair. I was very young, but I was only maybe 30 or something, but I had a short affair with his sister. And just before he brought me on stage, where he's fucked my sister. He brought me on stage to that. Here he is. He's a mate of my brother's. He's fucked my sister. Here he is. And I was just so embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. Because he hadn't talked to him, and it was, anyway.
And he obviously wouldn't have told you that he was going to do that.
Well, it probably only occurred to him. He was up there, I don't know. But so he would just do the most insane things. And if he rubbed people up the wrong way and they didn't like him for it, I'm not surprised, but it was just part of who he was.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, what a fitting little eulogy from you at the end of this, Dom.
Yeah, well, him and his wife Jane, they gave me my first, as I say, my first open spot, my first paid 10, my first paid 20. So those kind of landmarks stay with you.
Absolutely. And
it seems like being a fan of your work, obviously running the family, Dom. Dear fellow, I can't thank you enough for this. In the unlikely event that anyone listening to this is unfamiliar with your work, what things have you got bubbling away at the moment?
Well, if you're interested in me, I've just published this book. You can see over my shoulder, Secret History of Gold. So if you're interested in gold, you can read that. And if you're interested in my financial stuff, I have a newsletter called The Flying Frisby. Uh, that's it, theflyingfrisby.com. Sign up for that. And if you're interested in coming to watch me do comedy, I have another website called frisby.lol, and you'll find all my gigs there, frisby.lol. And just go to gig list and come and watch me.
That is absolutely fantastic. And if anyone listening is interested in my two bobs worth, Dom is well worth a watch on the comedy. So, Dom, thank you so much for your time. I genuinely appreciate it, and look forward to our paths crossing again soon in real life, one day soon.
Thanks very much, Sam. Pleasure to talk to you.
So there he goes, Mr. Dominic Frisby. That is not a hat rack he's got up there, is it? I think there was loads to get your teeth into in that episode, but here are 3 takeaways. Number 1, when you're speaking to anyone, don't read notes. Just talk to people. Audiences can tell when you're reading or when you're just talking. And talking leads to connections. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if I mess up a bit? Well, that brings me on to point number 2. Audiences don't care. Sometimes they even like errors. Boris Johnson made a whole career out of looking like a bumbling idiot. Number 3 is empathy. When you're putting something together, think to yourself, are they going to get this? Is it too obscure? Does it need too much setup to be worth it? Think, 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 and you will be rewarded. Thank you for listening to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. If you've enjoyed it, why not share it with someone else who you think might get it? And give us a follow while you're at it. See you next time.